our real focus when we talk about operational best practices is going to be to kind of condense some of the information that you get from the Analysis Services Operations Guide, which is a white paper that's published out on SQLcat.com. And if you want to go take a look out there, it's a really, really good read. It's about 96 pages. So as you can imagine, I have 96 slides that cover everything that's in that book. So I'm just kidding. But we are going to go through some slides just talking about things that we're going to be able to do to configure our server more efficiently, to be able to optimize our I/O performance, to be able to improve our query performance, as well as to make sure that we're able to monitor those things. So how do we know that we're actually improving? We don't know unless we actually are able to monitor and see this is our before, this is our after. So the first thing we're going to talk about is configuring the server. You want to make sure that you have an operating system, very important, step number one. But even more important than that, make sure that you have all the recommended hotfixes. A lot of organizations have, obviously delayed implementation for hotfixes and service packs as they go through testing. A lot of those hotfixes are performance and scalability related. With the cumulative update that just came out recently for SQL Server, Microsoft released almost 96 MDX performance improvements or performance fixes for functionality that was where MDX was not behaving as expected in analysis services. 96 sounds like a big number. It is. It's a big impact for a subset of a product as small as MDX. But in the grand scheme of things, it's overall a relatively stable product. The hotfixes especially, there's a specific hotfix for 2008 that's included in 2008 R2 that will help optimize for asynchronous I/O. If you're running Kerberos, congratulations and my condolences all at the same time. Kerberos is a little tricky. That may be an understatement. Some of you are probably laughing in the background, but Kerberos is going to require a couple of additional hotfixes on all the servers that are involved in authenticating back to your analysis services environment. So good things to just be aware of as you begin to configure your server before you even get to the analysis services side of things. Once you get into analysis services, then we have our INI file configuration. So the INI file is going to store a lot of our settings, and this isn't all the settings in the INI file. These are just most of the ones that people actually may or may not go in and change. I wouldn't recommend changing many of these without talking to an escalation engineer on the analysis services support team. But there are a few that you can adjust, and some that we'll talk about through the course of today, like memory heap type and heap type for objects. That's going to increase our throughput for high concurrency systems, really sort of optimizing for multi-user, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Hard memory, low memory, and total memory, we'll talk a little bit about those. Our goal with those is really to make sure that we're taking the best advantage of the economical memory management process that analysis services uses, and I'll talk some more about what that means when we get to memory. Coordinator execution mode and coordinator query max threads, those are controlling the concurrency of your ability to run queries. Coordinator build max threads is helping to control the concurrency and the number of threads when you're doing processing or pulling data into the queue. Your aggregation memory limits, you also have buffer memory limits and buffer record limits. Being able to increase those is going to really help with processing speed, but it will consume more memory, as you can see on the slide. The reason that it helps during processing is the more memory you can bring in, or the more data you can bring in per buffer, the better your compression is going to be when it goes down to the disk. So we're going to be able to find more duplicate data per buffer segment in order to reduce the overall size of that buffer as it goes into our eventual data store. The next few we really don't mess with very much. Those are really session timeout variables and things like that. If you're getting a lot of timeouts, talk to CSS and they can help guide you as to what the best value for that really should look like. Allowed browsing folders. For those of you who are relatively new to analysis services, you've probably been very frustrated when you go to restore a backup and you try to browse to the folder and it doesn't let you. You need to make sure that whatever folder you're going to put your backups in is in this tag, in this list, and you can actually edit this through the advanced properties of the server through Management Studio as well. Many of these properties can be edited through the advanced server property window in Management Studio. If you right-click on the server, go to Properties and say Show Advanced, there's a little checkbox at the bottom. Many of these will be in there, but not all of them. That's why it's important to know where your INI file is in case you need to go out and make an edit. Your temp directory sounds a lot like tempdb, right? So people probably think, well, you need to make sure that's really, really tuned. It sort of has the opposite effect in analysis services. One of the counters that we'll talk about later shows why your temp directory really shouldn't see a whole lot of action. If you look at what it's used for over here, controlling where disk spills go, obviously a disk spill is a bad thing. So if something is happening in their temp directory, typically we may be experiencing some performance challenges or some bottlenecks that we want to address. When we talk about memory configuration, memory in analysis services runs on what's called an economical memory management model. So every time something is pulled into cache, it gets an income. So it's being used, it's valuable, so it gets $1, for instance. Then every time that it has to sit there as the memory clerk comes by, if the system's not under a lot of pressure, it'll come by and say, hey, give me 5 cents, and you'll say, oh, I got enough income for that, I was valuable enough to get $1, here's 5 cents. Now, as more memory begins to be consumed and available memory becomes more valuable, staying in cache is going to cost more money. So as it can, hopefully it's been used enough to get enough income to pay its taxes, but if not, it will age out. It'll say, look, you don't have enough to pay the tax, you can't stay in cache, you're going to have to be aged out until we need you again, we'll bring you back. And so we have two kinds of memory that get cached. Really, we have shrinkable memory and non-shrinkable memory. And the shrinkable memory is really your data cache, your calculation cache, and your paged in dimension data. That data can be easily moved in and out of cache whenever the system becomes under memory pressure. Non-shrinkable memory is typically only attacked when we're looking around our total memory limit or our hard memory limit. And it's going to start deallocating memory pretty aggressively from not only shrinkable memory, but if you get to the hard memory limit, non-shrinkable memory is going to start being affected. So even active sessions will begin, to be selectively killed. Query memory will begin to be severely restricted or taken away, resulting in query timeouts and query failures. Obviously, we want to stay away from that. So make sure that your system is appropriately sized and appropriately monitored so that you can watch and make sure that you're not getting very, very close to these particular values. When we are monitoring memory, make sure you go out and find some resources that teach you how to use perfmon. Most people don't wind up looking at memory counters in perfmon. They just look at maybe memory in use just to see the trend next to their CPU, and that tends to work pretty well. But when you look at the analysis services counters, because of the way that they scale, they're not going to look quite right.